through. Wow.
Absolutely. And we want to just applaud all the teachers, obviously Rancho Christian, but every teacher everywhere, public school, private school. Thank you so much for all you're doing for these kids. In fact, I just talked to a public school teacher last night at an event, and she was so excited that when the kids came into her classroom, they could not wait because they hadn't had school for about almost a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so
I'm sure that will wear off soon enough for those kids.
A couple days.
I hate school.
Honeymoon.
Yeah.
Lots of mead.
Yeah, I'm on my 27th year of my honeymoon. I don't know what this 1 month thing is.
Hey, that's so
I'm at 27 years. Honey's
that
on mine.
So
What's up,
nice.
baby?
Oh,
But you're not going first fall, sorry.
Let's talk about RE-REIMAGINE. We're at the tail end of this series, which has been a great series. We're kind of walking with Jesus through his life, through his teaching, on how he imagined the world could be and how it really should be if we follow him.
Yeah, and today we're going to hit the cross, which I really liked. I didn't know the wedding ring thing, and that World War II was for men to remember their wives when they're off the war. And it's a symbol, right? It's a symbol, and the cross is this huge symbol. And it's a symbol that almost every Christian denomination really kind of grabs hold of. I mean, you think of the Catholic Church, and they have the crucifix, and that's all over, their buildings and inside their sanctuaries. You have the Orthodox. Orthodox has definitely images of the cross. Yep. Mainline denominations, outside of churches, inside of churches, evangelical churches. I mean, all these pictures, the cross is pretty much everywhere. And I think it's interesting. I think the cross has a reputation, right?
Oh, yeah.
It has a reputation where you can go, right? It's a sign of, as I put up here, a symbol of love and humanitarianism. When you think of the Red Cross. All over the world, the Christian church has been on the forefront of helping the societies and worlds when major catastrophes happen. Right. And you see that sign of the cross, that's a safe place to go. A safe place to go and get help. And that's pretty cool. Yeah. I think that's amazing. We even wear it as jewelry, right? We wear it as jewelry. Yeah. I remember I was in Northeast India once, and someone came up to me, and we were talking about Christianity, and they said, well, everyone in America is a Christian, right? I mean, Madonna has a cross on. Right. And they assumed that means, well, if Madonna's a Christian, everyone's a Christian. That was their idea of Christianity. So I would say that, 99% of the world, probably when they see a cross, have some sort of an understanding that this is about Jesus. It's about his mission and about the love of God.
I mean, one of the most popular tattoos out there is the cross.
Yeah.
People putting it on their body.
Right.
So it's ubiquitous. It is absolutely everywhere. And our church has 4 crosses on our campus that we are very excited about the history behind them, not just the symbolism of following Jesus and the sacrificial love that he brings, but even the story of our own community of faith that we can mark by the crosses that we have around campus. Our OG cross, 1969 on the campus just down the street here. It is now hanging in the West campus in our grand lobby. So you can see that original 1969 cross, and it's well cared for and beautiful. It's right there in the West.
That's one of my favorite ones on the campus.
It is,
Every time
nice.
I see that
it's
one,
really cool. Yeah. And then there's the second cross, which was built in 1980 when we expanded on our original campus and built our worship center, multi-purpose center. And that is now the cross that hangs outside of the central campus. Right. So every time you come to church here, that cross right out there above the staircase was built in 1980. And both of those crosses we hand carried over here
yes, you did.
in 2005.
Well, you didn't. I hear last service I learned some new things. Who took that picture, Scott, while they were carrying it? What were you doing?
So I was actually in the helicopter. That sounds so bad. Taking pictures and video of the crosswalk. Yeah. I mean, it's a long way. It's a mile.
Yeah, but they carried them. But but I wasn't at Rancho at the time. I was at another church in town. And I remember coming that day, watching you up there. It was so fun. You guys were on a lift. You're just working away, getting that thing up. Pastor Steve is raving both hands at everyone like, hello, everyone. Scott's sweating, and I'm going, well, there's the contrast of the two pastors at this church, But it was a beautiful scene.
I want to clarify,
really cool.
though. I did take the Rancho helicopter. Did you know we had a Rancho helicopter?
Now I know I don't see you around town very often. You just fly from the roof to your roof.
So the real story, so you don't get concerned, is that our contractor, he's a big-time contractor. He was actually a helicopter pilot, and he says, hey, I'll take you and your kids up so you can see from above. Yeah. But it was kind of weird. I lifted off with my kids on that campus and landed right here. And then, but anyway, it was a ton of fun. One of the best days in Rancho history, really because of the symbolism of the cross. Yeah. Right, our 2 crosses that we cherish as symbols that we follow Jesus, his love, and his sacrifice. And then we have 2 other crosses. One was hand-built by our construction manager Gary Berry, precious guy. He's been at Rancho forever. He has been our construction manager every phase of this campus. And he hand-built that wooden cross by our fountain over there. And so it's a very special symbol at the center of our campus. And then when we were building the West Campus in 2016, we were halfway done with the campus. And as we saw it going up, we thought, we're missing something here. There's a bit of a steeple there, and it needed a cross. And so we mobilized the engineers and electricians, and we have a lighted cross on the West Campus, and at night it's beautiful. Until the hospital was built, it was the tallest structure, totally. Hospital built, beat us. But those crosses are very, very special to us because of what they mean.
Yeah, but we're going to reimagine some things today, right? Because if you guys don't, the cross was a sign of like a state execution item, right? It's like where they hung criminals, crucified and killed people in some of the most torture. One of the most, the talk is one of the most excruciating, it's almost like death by drowning, in your own stuff and your lungs. And it's just brutal. So it is a symbol of death. It's a symbol of torture. It's a symbol, I remember I had a friend once say, it'd be like, he was kind of anti-wearing crosses, and it was kind of like, it'd be like putting an electric chair around your necklace, and wearing that. But there's reason behind that. We're talking a journey here. We preach Christ and Him crucified, it says in 1 Corinthians. So the cross isn't just on the buildings of all these different church denominations. It is the center of what we teach about, and it's the center of our faith. And having it be a symbol of death and having it be that symbol, it matters. It matters. But it wasn't always like that. There's a journey to get to there. Like in the Old Testament, salvation might have had some different symbols, and what was that?
It did. So in the Old Testament, you don't see anything like the cross in the Old Testament before Christ, of course. But what you do see is a symbol of the throne in the Old Testament. When the nation of Israel, and we see in the Old Testament the journey of the nation of Israel, their journey to discover God, their journey to honor God, and their journey to really try to get God to bless them, they had the definition of the throne. We want power, we want prominence, we want prosperity, and if we please God, He'll give that stuff to us, and that was their definition of salvation. So if you read the Old Testament, that's why a lot of people have some struggles, understandable struggles, matching the Old Testament with the New Testament. And here's what I want to say about that. They're not meant to match. They're two different stories. Now, one God, through all of it, is really working with humankind to reveal Himself over time, reveal Himself through Israel in the Old Testament, reveal Himself through history. But the paradigms are entirely different. In the Old Testament, they were seeking power because here's this small tribal nation of Israel trying to get land, seize land, earn prosperity and wealth, earn prominence in the region, and they were trying to get God to give that to them, and that's how they define salvation. Understandably, that's what they wanted, that's what they needed.
I mean, they spent 400 years in slavery. I mean, now they come out, and they're like, what do we do? Well, we obviously want a king, and even though God was like, no, you don't want a king, I'm your king. No, we're coming out now, we're free, and we want to change this.
So they wanted that earthly throne, that earthly power. And here's a few things from the Old Testament. Isaiah 11. In that day, so this is a promise of future power, future prosperity. In that day, the heir to David's throne will be a banner of salvation to all. So this is what salvation means in the Old Testament to them. The nations will rally to him. The land where he lives will be a glorious place. Power, prosperity, prominence. Isaiah 62, the nations will see your righteousness. So they're marrying their relationship with God with their quest for political power. Kind of sound familiar? The nations will see your righteousness. World leaders will be blinded by your glory. And you will be given a new name by the Lord's own mouth. The Lord will hold you in His hand for all to see, a splendid crown in the hand of God. So the definition of salvation in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, was prominence, prosperity, and power. And that's always really human nature, right? We want that. We want to rise. We want power. We want to be noticed. We want to be respected. So that's just basic human nature. And if we have a faith system, we will manipulate that faith system to get what we want. And we see that happening today in American politics, using God to get political power. It happens all the time. It's always happened from the beginning of time. And even in this last 50 years of the Western church in particular, there's been an obsession on end times theology, right? I was raised in that. I think you were as well. And so that obsession on end times theology goes like this. The good people will be rescued. The bad people will be slaughtered. Then Jesus will come back again with us to give us power over the entire earth. That's the popularized end times theology. And this is one of the images from that. And it's kind of a disturbing image, to be honest with you, because again, it is trying to marry God and his name with a quest for political power. But Jesus reimagined all this.
Yeah, he does. So he comes, and the cross is the center of that, right? Jesus comes to help us to reimagine that it's not about prominence. It's not about power. It's not about that. We went through, I remember our Creed series we did through, going through Philippians chapter 2. It's one of our favorites. And it's when we just used, I remember you had that, the triangle upside down, like the whole system being turned upside down, this image of God. Even when you think about Jesus' own disciples, when he said it's hard for a rich man to get through to the kingdom, well, who can make it? Obviously the rich people are blessed. Obviously they're the ones that are entering in. And Jesus comes to flip that upside down. And it starts with like Palm Sunday. That last week of Christ's life, that Passion Week, Palm Sunday, he comes riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. When you think about that, in John chapter 12, a great multitude heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. They took branches of palm trees. They went out to meet him and cried out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." But he's riding on a donkey. And a lot of people say it's the other entrances where the king would come in with his big horses and chariots. Right. And I always remember, do you guys remember Maverick, the movie with Mel Gibson? The very opening scene of Maverick, I know.
It's a good one.
This hits me. I'll never forget it. Here comes a cowboy hat over the little hill. Here comes Mel Gibson, and then he's riding on a little donkey. And it's just the most hilarious beginning. And the first time I saw that, I went like, wow, Jesus wasn't coming on in a big stallion. He was coming in on a donkey. And that should have given them an understanding. This is a humble king. This is a king that's coming in for a different purpose than what they might have thought. He even weeps over the city at that time. And when he says, why does he weep? And some people go, because of the sin, because of this. No, it says because he was bringing peace and they were going to miss it. Yeah. They were thinking peace was going to come by rule and reign and having them be in control. Right? Yeah. The throne, right? Yeah. And this is going to be a different rule and a different reign. But it's a reign that creates peace and brings peace. So, yeah, very powerful. But that week just gets, his popularity doesn't get up. It kind of starts diving. What happens the rest of that week?
So that's the narrative of the last week. We call it the Passion Week. It's the last week of the life of Christ before the cross. So he comes in on Palm Sunday, and they're all about the throne. They're all about power. They're all about military victory. They didn't quite get it yet. Jesus is in a quest for the bottom, humility and sacrifice. And so he doesn't take the bait. He's not rallying armies. He's not getting swords, horses, and chariots to overthrow the religious leaders of the Jews or the Roman leaders. He is there to serve. And so he starts giving himself, as he always has, to the least, the last, the lost, those who are in need, those who are outcast, those who are sinners. He starts hanging out with the lowly people and serving them. And the crowds are like, wait a minute, I thought you were taking a throne. And Jesus says, no, I'm going to the bottom. So he starts getting rejected. Conspiracies start to form that we're going to kill Jesus because the religious leaders didn't want him around. He was becoming kind of a threat because all of these peasants were coming to him. And this crowd was amassing that was a threat, not politically, but sort of socially and culturally. It was a different kind of a movement.
When you think about the Sermon on the Mount, he starts off with those Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, and it just goes right to the people that felt cursed. And says, you're blessed, you're blessed, you're blessed. You can imagine the people that thought they were blessed going like, wait a minute, this is opposite.
And so he's here for the least, right? He's here for the ones who were rejected and despised, and that completely missed their expectations of this warrior, right? And so he gathers his disciples together on Thursday night. This is the Passover Feast, the Last Supper as we call it. And he immediately sets the stage that we're not rallying together to take any political authority. We're here to serve each other, and he leads by example. John 13:1, Jesus knew the hour had come for him to depart this world. His trajectory was to the bottom, including death. So having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the very end. His mission at the last hours of his life, to love, to serve, to sacrifice, to seek the bottom. And then in John 13:5, he pours water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. Does that sound like somebody who's after a throne? No. That's the lowest servant in the household, is washing the feet of the disciples before dinner. And he wiped them with the towel with which he was girded. And Peter, we love Peter, he's always trying to get Jesus to the top, right? Every time Jesus is looking to serve, Peter says, no, you've got to be at the top. You've got to be at the throne. So Peter says, you shall never wash my feet, right?
Yeah, it's a heavy thing. He rebukes Jesus multitude of times whenever Jesus is talking about he's going to be killed. Not on my watch, not on my watch. And this is an amazing passage. Right between verse 1 and verse 5, it says that, and all authority was given to Jesus. So he poured water. I mean, I remember we were at a conference once and Andy Stanley spoke. And he talked about, what do you do when you're the most powerful person in a room? What did Jesus do? All authority in heaven has been given to him. So he's going to show what the true king does, right? Takes a basin of water and washes feet. Whew. It's a powerful scene.
And then when Jesus rebukes Peter, he says this, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. And I don't think Jesus was doing that to slam Peter. I think he was just saying, hey, listen, I'm here to serve you. That's why I'm here. Yeah. He's not just straightening Peter up to straighten him up. He's saying, listen, I came to serve, so if you don't want to be served by me, you're missing the entire point. Yeah. And keep in mind, Jesus is the full expression of God himself. So Jesus is serving Peter, he's serving the disciples, and Jesus is still serving us today because that's the nature of God himself, is to serve. And then later in the meal, he just establishes what salvation really is, right? It's not a quest for the throne, it's a quest for selfless love. So Jesus says, I'm leaving you with one commandment. Here's the one commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Then again, he says, greater love is no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And he was crucified hours later.
Yeah, and it feels sometimes like we're still, like we're where the Jews were back then, still waiting, he's going to come and dominate. But that's not the case, you know. And what happens then is that the religious leaders kind of work with the Roman Empire to kind of talk them into that. This guy's going to do this throne. Here's all his teaching on love, and I'm laying my life down, and he's going to do this throne. He's going to take over the Roman Empire, and literally gets them to arrest him and say, well, we're going to end this next king. Yeah. But the interaction between him and Pilate is very interesting. So when he's standing there next to Pilate, you see this in John chapter 18. He asks him, are you a king? Are you a king? And Jesus thus says, hey, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. And I think it's interesting. What truth? That's a question we always ask. The truth of who God is, the truth of what the King God really looks like, that at this point now, it's so diluted. Right? It's so diluted. It's so hard to see. And I will bear witness. Everyone who hears the truth hears my voice. And Pilate says, and what is truth? And at that point, he says, man, I don't see anything to accuse this guy. And he wants to wash his hands.
So Jesus was no political threat. He wasn't seeking a throne.
No.
Pilate, the Roman governor, even knew that.
Yeah. I think the truth was that it's not a kingdom of prominence. Exactly. It's not a kingdom of prosperity and power. Right. That's the truth that he's here to put on display. Absolutely. That's the truth that he's here to show. So salvation came to the world, right? Through a kingdom, right? But it came to a world because the very Son of God laid his life down for that world. It's not a king that's going to rule by power, but it's a king that ruled by putting himself below. What a beautiful picture. I mean, that's what this is coming. And it's coming against a messed up view of God. And I think we still could have that. And it's amazing to see what Jesus showed.
I love the fact that you said that, because when we talk about salvation, we might have been raised in a certain view of salvation. The old covenant view of salvation is that God is going to bless us when we seek power. Jesus comes and reimagines salvation that says, no, it's about love. It's about serving other people. It's about sacrificing for other people. And that is the full expression of God. So salvation is changing our mind about who God is so that we can have a different experience with God. God is here to serve. He's here to love. He's here to accept the world as they are. He's here to embrace the sinner and the sick and the outcast and the judged. It's a whole different view of God. And that's really what salvation is. It's viewing God differently.
Yeah. You
have a phrase that you use.
Yeah, I got it from someone quite a few years ago. And it seems like a simple phrase. You guys have heard me, if you've been around me, use it before. But this really did. You kind of said it. Yeah. That the cross was not about changing God's mind about us, but about changing our mind about God. That was like a moment. Yeah. Right? Because what I always was raised, that God is angry, and you look at the cross, that's what you deserve. Yeah. And he's shedding all that on Jesus instead of on me. And it was all that. And that changed. All of a sudden I started, you see the depth of sin, the ugliness of sin of the cross. Yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, you see what violence and power and all that can do. Yeah. It could cause a son of man who taught nothing but love and acceptance and hope to be crucified, brutally crucified, right? He does carry that. You see how sin can darken our minds to not be able to see how loving God is. When Jesus on the cross says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I mean, not that. You're going to get to that one. Sorry. When Jesus says, why have you forsaken me? I don't think God did forsake Jesus. The Bible says that the Father was in the Son reconciling the world. So Jesus was experiencing the weight of sin when he felt abandoned when you're not. And that's the consequence of sin. And so what Jesus is doing is he's opening our eyes. He's opening our eyes and helping us see God differently. That, again, had been so just muddied and corrupted because of religion and politics throughout all these years. And Jesus is coming and saying, now, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So he's changing our mind about God. And that's why we've said, and we did this in this series, if you want to see God, we believe, look at Jesus. You've seen me, you've seen the Father. He is the exact representation of God, and I think we want to land there.
Absolutely.
land there. Yeah.
Thanks, bud.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you always. Such good stuff, and I want to put a fine point on what Steve just said. We can't miss it. For those of us who have been raised in religious environments, we might have heard that the cross is what we deserve. God is so mad at us that we deserve to be on the cross, being tortured, blood spilled, and death. That's a common understanding of the cross. But what that does is it causes us to view God as someone so furious with us that he's ready to torture and murder us for the things that we've done wrong. And I'm telling you, that is the opposite of what the cross communicates. The cross communicates the depth of evil of the world that would swallow up the Son of God, but the depth of God's love for us, who happen to be sinners. We're not perfect. We haven't arrived. We know our failures. We get that. Despite those failures, Jesus gave his life in love, not in wrath. It's a fascinating thing to think about, our minds changing about what the cross is. The cross shows us who God is. The cross shows us who God is. The cross shows us the depth of the love of Christ. We talked about the old covenant view of salvation was seeking a throne through Jesus. In the new covenant, which we see in the New Testament, in the new covenant, salvation is symbolized by a cross. Selfless, sacrificial love. The kind of love that will compel Jesus, the perfect Son of God, to be tormented by the evil of the world, the bloodthirstiness of the world, beaten with fists by Roman soldiers, beaten with rods, his beard ripped out, flogged near to death, mocked with a purple robe and a crown of thorns driven into his head, spit upon, carrying the shame of the cross through the city to the place called the skull, a place of death, where he was stripped naked, hands and feet nailed to a cross, lifted up in front of all of Israel to slowly suffocate to death for 6 hours. The perfect Son of God gave himself to express that kind of love and commitment and sacrifice to the world. And get this, he's on the cross, suffocating to death, struggling for every single breath, and he still has the selfless, sacrificial love to say to his murderers, you are forgiven. He says, Father, forgive my murderers. They don't know what they're doing. Could you imagine that kind of selflessness? That kind of sacrifice? While he was on the cross, he had the wherewithal and the kindness and the love and compassion and grace to look to the thief next to him also being executed and say, today you're going to join me in paradise. He had the selflessness to look to his mom and says, Mother, take care of my best friend John, this young man. And he says to John, take care of my mother. As he's on the cross, he's looking out for his family and his friends. It's remarkable, the selflessness, the sacrificial love declared by Jesus when he said, it is finished, and bowed his head and gave up his spirit, sacrificing himself to the point of death. That says everything about who God is, and we see that through Jesus. So what does the cross just shout to us? What does the cross scream to the world? Why is the cross so central to our faith? Because it communicates first and foremost that God is love. We've said there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. That's exactly what Jesus did. And then he looks at us. He says, you're my friends. He laid down his life for his disciples. He laid down his life for us. That's who God is. God is love, and we are loved. The cross just shouts we're loved. Romans 5:8, God demonstrated his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Listen, God knows our failures. He knows our flaws. He knows our guilt. He knows our shame. But what he says through the cross is, I don't look at you that way. Yes, you're a sinner. But Jesus loved us and gave his life for us for the cause of communicating how gracious and forgiving God is. The whole book of Galatians is about really the cross telling us we're free from religious law. So for those of us who are thinking God needs us to please him by our obedience, God needs us to appease him by religious devotion, God needs us to get all of our doctrines right so he'll be satisfied with us. For those of us who are kind of trapped in that religious thinking, turn that around. The cross says you don't need any of that. Listen to Galatians 3. The law says, this is the old covenant commandment, says it is through obedience that a person has life. And so before Jesus, people are struggling. I've got to obey God. I've got to appease God so he'll bless me with power, prominence, and prosperity. The cross says you don't need that. Christ has rescued us from this curse. On the cross, Jesus took upon himself the curse for our wrongdoing. We don't need to prove anything to God. We simply need to believe in his grace and forgiveness through the sacrificial love of Jesus Christ. The cross proves we're forgiven. He doesn't define us by our sin. He doesn't define us by our failures. Romans 5:9, we've been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, so he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. In Christ, there is no condemnation whatsoever. All we see is love, being made right. There's nothing we can do to be made right by God, no matter how obedient we are, no matter how generous we are, no matter how devout we are, no matter how much our doctrines are all put together correctly. None of us, not one of us, can earn this saving relationship with God. It is purely a gift of grace, the gift of forgiveness through Jesus, proven by his death. The cross says we're united with God. United with God. We are one with God. Nothing to do with us, all to do with his grace through Jesus. But now you've been united with Christ Jesus. Once you were far away from God, but now you have been brought near to him through the blood of Christ. It's through the selfless, sacrificial love of Christ demonstrated by the cross that we know we're united with God. And we're not only united with God, but we're now united with one another, because if love is the one thing, if love is the one priority, and if love is shown most by the sacrifice of Jesus, then not only do we get to enjoy God's love, but we get to enjoy loving others, right? Ephesians 2, for Christ himself has brought us peace. He's united Jew and Gentile, race, ethnicity, united us into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. Love unites us to God. Love unites us to each other. And you could just see right now, right here in our own country, the difference between people seeking power in God's name and people seeking love in God's name. I mean, you can pick it out, right? I mean, watch your news. Watch churches. See what they're doing. You're either using God's name for your own political power, your own influence, your own rights, or you're following Jesus and loving others and seeking unity. You could either use God's name to divide or use God's name to unite. We follow Jesus who went to the cross. Listen, if Jesus went to a throne, we'd have every right to say, all right, it's about political power. Let's mobilize it. Let's get it, right? So we can be elevated, so we can have our rights protected, so we can be in charge, we can be in control, we could have all the power and influence. If Jesus went to a throne, let's do that. But he didn't. He went to a cross. Selfless, loving, gracious sacrifice. So the cross reimagines salvation, not as a struggle for prominence, prosperity, and power, but humble sacrifice to benefit others. Humble sacrifice to benefit others. Isn't that beautiful? There's two parts to this. One is receiving the humble sacrifice of Jesus that benefits us. Jesus gave his life to prove the love of God, to prove the forgiveness of God, to show it off to the whole world, and we get to believe that, we get to receive that, we get to accept that. We get to live that saved life by living in the peace of knowing we're loved and forgiven unconditionally just as we are. That brings a smile to our face. It brings a peace to our heart. We get to enjoy that. But then we also get to live that out. We get to live that out. Look at Galatians 2:19 through 20. I have been crucified with Christ. I've been crucified with Christ. And so the cross is not just about following Jesus who died historically 2,000 years ago on a cross. It's about our life right now. We are crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live. It's not about me, but Christ lives in me. We want Christ to live through us, right? So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. So through the cross, we get to enjoy this relationship with God of peace and love and forgiveness, accepting me just as I am. But then he also kind of whispers in your ear and my ear, and he says, yes, Jesus was crucified to show love to the world, to show the extent of God's love for all. But you can live crucified as well. We can live crucified, which means we don't have to live for ourselves. We don't have to live for our own prominence, our own prosperity, and our own power, which is kind of the American dream, to be honest with you, right? It's this thing we're all kind of striving for, more and better and me and my way. But what if we considered ourselves crucified and that this life is not about me? This life is about following Jesus to the cross, following Jesus on the cross, following Jesus to death, and considering ourselves dead. I'm crucified with Christ. Now, if I'm crucified with Christ and I'm not worried about me, how am I going to be as a husband to my wife? I guarantee I haven't done this perfectly yet, but I'm working on it. I'm dead to myself so I can serve my wife. And I don't have to wonder if she's serving me as much as I'm serving her. So the goal of a marriage here is a husband crucified to himself, serving his wife, a wife crucified to herself, serving her husband. That's really cool. And if it's not really cool and somebody's struggling, I'm dead to myself. So if my wife's struggling, I can serve her and not feel ripped off. I'm dead. Got it? It's a lot. This is 401 level stuff. This is deep weeds. This is deep into the pool. This is absolute maturity. Dying to self to live for the benefit of others. We can do that for our kids. And so we can have this relationship with our kids where we're not expecting them to make our lives easier. If you want your life to be easier, don't have kids. It's not about that, right? We have kids because we get to pour ourselves into them so that they will thrive and they will be benefited by our loving service to them. And so if I'm dead, I'm not worried about how easy my kids are making my life. I'm crucified with Christ. I can live for their benefit, right? To raise them up in maturity, to raise them up in Christ, to raise them up so they will be considered crucified in their own mind and serve the world around them. If I'm crucified to myself, how can I treat my neighbor? How can I serve my neighbor? Literally in my neighborhood, how can I be a gracious person in my neighborhood and helping my neighbor? How can I serve those in town? You know, I'm not fighting for that parking spot, it's yours. I'll park, 10 spaces down, big deal, right? We're coming to a line. Oh, you first, not much of a hurry. I'm telling you, if you say that phrase, people will drop dead. So it's like, what do you mean you're not in a hurry? You're supposed to be doing this and you're supposed to try to get in front. No, you go first, you go first, you go first. At work, helping your teammates succeed. You know, working with your teammate to succeed. So it's not about just your job and your success. It's I'm going to live for your success. And I want you to prosper and I want you to make more money and I want you to have a promotion. And if we live that kind of a life, I know it's difficult. Some of your minds are like, what kind of place is this? It's following Jesus to the cross. How would we treat people who are in need? People who are without homes, people who are refugees, people who are immigrants, instead of looking at it always through political lenses. And listen, there's smart political policy, but at the end of it, it is all about human beings who are struggling. And how can people who are crucified to themselves help the world around us? How can we reconcile with people from different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds? How can we reconcile people politically? Somebody at some point has got to get our country back together again. At some point, our country can't be bitterly divided over D's and R's and blues and reds and every election that tears us apart every 2 years. Can somebody or some movement say it's not about that? It's not about a quest for thrones and power. It's about loving each other, being kind to each other, working together in our differences, finding common ground, and helping people to make the whole world a better place. Who's going to rise up and do that? It's supposed to be us. But it's the Christian faith oftentimes that confuses following Jesus with a quest for power instead of a quest for humble, selfless service. So let's close with a question and a vision. Can we, Rancho Church, be a community of the crucified? Can we be a community of the crucified? It's heavy stuff. It means life is not about me. It means we don't go to church to try to get God to answer our prayers the way we want and get our lives the way we want it. It means we come here as dead women and dead men trying to make the world around us better, just like Jesus did. When we walk from the west parking lot past that wooden cross, I'm crucified. When we pass the cross from the east, I'm crucified. I'm crucified with Christ. Life is not about me. My relationship with God is not about me. I followed Jesus to the cross. I am dead. I'm going to live for the benefit of my family, live for the benefit of my church, live for the benefit of my neighbors, live for the benefit of strangers, live for the benefit of people in need, and I'm going to live to unify this country and make this world a better place. That's my life, following Jesus to the cross. It's a beautiful life. None of us have achieved that perfectly, but we can be on a journey together to get there, right? And a wonderful journey that can be. Let's pray. Our God and Father, at this very moment, we express faith in you. We express belief in you. We receive the free gift of saving grace through Jesus Christ. A salvation that is not about self, not about seeking power, prosperity, prominence. It's about following Jesus to his death in humility and selfless sacrifice. We receive the love of Christ, the forgiveness of Christ, the grace of Christ as he showed it in full on the cross. Through his selfless sacrificial love, we know we're forgiven. We know you embrace us just as we are. You love us fully. You are our Father. We are your children. Help us to enjoy that and live in the peace of that. As we follow Jesus, help us to also bend that selfless sacrifice out to the world around us. Our world needs love. Our world needs humility. Our world needs a community to rise up to serve, to give, not to get. May we be that community. And God, I'm so grateful for this church. We are feeding people and housing people. So many dozens of ways that we are stepping up to be a community of the crucified. Not living for ourselves, but living for the benefit of others, showing the world the love of Christ because we lift up Jesus, we follow Jesus, and strive by your power to live like Jesus. In his name we pray, amen. Alex, would you close us out?
Yeah, and man, thank you, Scott. It's good to have you back, and thanks for helping us reimagine the cross this morning. This series has been so awesome. I hope it's been powerful for you, and I hope that this week, maybe as you drive by this campus or is at your house or wherever you are with your family, you will look at that cross and you will remember that we are the community of the crucified. That's awesome. Something good to take home. Hey, if you're watching online, thanks for being with us. If you're here, you can go out this morning, and I hope there's some food boxes left with some food from the farm. Every time you purchase that, you support the community mission of hope, and we just love to do that, and the food is good. My mother-in-law made some pico de gallo out of all that stuff, and man, it was so, so good. So go out there and do that. Support local outreach. Next Sunday, we are going to open up our Rancho gear store, so I know we've had a lot of questions about when that's going to be open again. It'll be open next Sunday. So come prepared to get some Rancho gear and support Thrive, our special needs ministry. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great week. Remember the cross. We will see you back here next Sunday as we continue our series. Take care.